It's deep, but somehow I've got this feeling that that could be just a little louder.
The wacky world of MultimediaJay.
So I swapped out this rather rudimentary Onkyo with one 8-inch for a dual 8-inch accordion-style klipsch box, which traditionally has given me the better bass over the years. Except the amplitude wasn't there. It sounded like the signal was attenuated at some point. So I went to go grab the subwoofer, and hey, what do you know? The RCA cable came right apart the minute I tried to lift this up. Gee, I wonder if there could have been something loose or something intermittent or whatever. So yeah, this is done. Stupid idea though it was, though I will recover the speaker wire by cutting that off. So I suppose while we're at it, and while I'm still on vacation most importantly, I should probably answer my remaining questions about all this speaker stuff basically ASAP. So let's get to that. First order of business would be, if I'm using this thing as a passive sub, how can I get the most performance out of it? Or would it be more worth it to swap one of the klipsch drivers from this sub into this box? I have a reason to believe, though, that the quality of the box affects how good the subwoofer performs, considering this thing is basically tuned for 30 Hz, and this thing was made to go down to 25. So I think the best option is to get the most out of this box. But let's do some tinkering and find out. First, let's check the multimeter for the Onkyo box. Now, impedance and resistance are not the same thing, but we're looking for comparable numbers in terms of their electrical characteristics. So this thing is made with 6 ohms impedance, which, when taken back to DC and turned into resistance, comes out to about 5.3 ohms. So where are we at on the klipsch box in terms of impedance matching and not attenuating the signal through too much resistance, just trying to drive the speakers in the first place? It's a bit tougher doing this with an RCA. Let's just tap this and see what we can get that number down to without shorting it. 28, 40, 30, come on, keep dropping. So you get the right spot. Let's see. About 12 ohms. About 12 ohms of resistance. So you figure it comes out to about 12 ohm impedance, which, similar to 12 ohm impedance, which would put it in the range for the actual AV receiver, but there's a bit more resistance with this. Granted, this thing was originally built for 4 ohms, so it may be more worth it to take the two series drivers and maybe consider wiring them in parallel, but that might drop the ohms a little too low. The difference between impedance and resistance is that resistance is DC specific, impedance is the vector sum of all things that slow down electrical current, both DC and AC type stuff, which is what you want in a speaker because you don't have a flat wave going through it, you have sound waves. So the vector sum of those is actually more useful in terms of things like impedance matching. But even with 12 ohms of impedance, this is still very much within the impedance range of the amplifier that it's going to and paired up with. Well, here's the old amplifier, still looking nice as always, despite the dead power relay being the whole reason why the system doesn't work. So I've been bypassing it all these years. Well, the thing is, I don't really need another analog audio system, and with today's equipment, between the DACs and the amp boxes that are available externally, a 500-watt bash amp inside a subwoofer just isn't really necessary anymore. So I could theoretically repair all this, but then what would I do with it? I'd have spent the money for nothing. So I've been bypassing the amplifier entirely. I've actually thought about removing the amplifier. The problem is, if I start taking stuff off, does that create holes in the case because you have screws now that don't go to anything anymore, and you have to take off some of this other stuff. So I figured I'd just leave it. It went down to 25 Hertz with it, so who cares? Who cares if it's there? Everything still looks okay in here. Everything all hooked up with solderless lugs. I want to disconnect that speaker, though, and put it in the Onkyo box and see how that affects how it sounds. These are klipsch woofers. Are they soldered? Yep, they are soldered in with solderless lugs, and the negative one is first for when I go to put this back. This is the kind of stuff I gotta get for, connecting things together like this. Nice and convenient. It's got a nice thick wire going to it as well. The duct tape that goes between this and the old SWS cable plug, which might be a source of resistance because it's a smaller wire, but the cable, the duct tape hasn't been completely blown apart by the base over the years, so let's get that woofer out of there and put it inside the Onkyo box and see if that makes any difference. Well, the speaker's out. Had a cute little plastic thing covering it up. on the front as well. So we have a paper cone, foam surrounds, and interestingly enough, we just picked this up without dropping it. Just do this here. Huge magnet on the back, but it's not actually branded as Klipsch. Really heavy, though. It's really heavy, though. I'm just worried that, I don't know if this is the glue or if this is starting to separate, but if we spin it around, it looks like it's separating on the far end no matter what, so that's cool and all. So, let's rig this up in the Onkyo box, and peekaboo. I wanted to do this because I'm actually tossing around the idea of whenever these foam rod or whatever, replacing them with car woofers. Although I'll probably buy a different impedance because they're wired in series. So maybe try to go for 8 ohms total instead of 12 ohms. See if that helps with the impedance matching to the amplifier, because the impedance range, I believe, is 6 to 12. So if with these things being at 12, they're right at the edge. If the impedance is too far off, then you lose efficiency and basically sound. Another interesting thing I've found is these little storage containers I originally bought for Geek House 5S stuff. Keeping a couple of them handy in the project area is great for sorting out the screws by what they are. So there's the wood screws that bolt in the amplifier, and there's the bolts that hold in the speakers. Cool stuff. Let's mount this in the Onkyo box and see what that does to the frequency response of the Onkyo. I'm thinking it won't do very much, but hey, you never know until you try. While we're at it, what are we looking at for resistance on this thing in terms of the impedance? 5.2. Should be a good match when I put this inside the Onkyo box then. So, I'm guessing a 6 ohm for impedance, or these 8s, and there's usually that much of an ohm difference. We'll figure it out. What would be cool is if the quality of the speaker actually affected the bass response more so than the box itself. I'm not so sure that's the case. I've seen some really well-designed boxes take little speakers and drive them way, way down. So, what do you have in the Onkyo by default? This feels more like carbon fiber type stuff, or maybe it's just textured or something like that. Yeah, foamish, rubberish stuff around the side, but one driver. So I hope it's hooked up with solderless lugs and not hardwired. Let's see. I believe I've done this before, but I'm kind of getting a little rusty here. Okay, that woofer's out. You can see the differences in the magnet sizes between the two. And, of course, slight differences in the materials and the dimensions. Hopefully this doesn't carry over to the screw terminals as well. Note to self for further teardowns, this solderless lug has a little release that you have to unhook before it will slide off. It clicks into place. Weird, because that wasn't the case on the Klipsch's. Then again, this is a down-firing enclosure versus reaching in from the side. The Onkyo looks pretty basic and pretty clean, and of course, camera has a hard time focusing on it. Make fun of that little paper towel roll plus of a port going along the back. So, alright, let's hook up the Klipsch driver and see how much the screws line up. Hopefully they do. I tend to not have very much luck with these sorts of things. Well, this looks promising. The screw holes all line up. Matter of fact, let's finish the look. Let's complete the look and bring the speaker ring from the other box to this one. Doesn't that look nice? Nah, this looks really nice, but we don't have the hardware for it because of the different ways in which these cabinets are built. So, the Onkyo used more wood screw type things while Klipsch was using more straight up bolts. So you have differences in the width of both and the thread patterns and stuff like that. And I really don't feel like, messing with the plastic here because that's wider than before. I could theoretically risk not fastening everything all the way down just to have it look nice, but we're just fiddling with this for now. I'd rather just use the screws that I know work with the box and the thread pattern and all that other fun stuff. So, there we go. Looks pretty innocuous. I don't know if you want to call this a sleeper subwoofer or not, but we now have a Klipsch driver inside an Onkyo box that farts out around 30 hertz. If you want to call that polishing a turd, go right ahead, but I can hear some bass if I tap the cone a little. Well, the good news is that this thing is way lighter than its Klipsch counterpart, so it'll be effortless to walk over and set back up. I do think, though, that I should probably take that other thing that I have and tin the copper on it. Nah, let's see how it works. Okay, the polished turd is in position. Now, I've listened to some music, specifically Bass Waves' Urbania, some yacht rock, some 70s songs with a little bit of bass in them with the bass guitar and whatnot, as well as played some ESO, and I'm hearing the boominess of the Onkyo subwoofer, even though there's a Klipsch driver in there. just for the heck of it. Let's bring it on down. I don't know. I just find something funny about coming all the way down from middle A into subwoofer territory. 100 hertz. Something's rattling. Yeah, this is bassy, so said the college version of me. Whoa! That was cleaner. Yeah, but now it farts out around 30 hertz. Turn that up, and why don't we turn the amp up a little more? I think this thing has a protection circuit. Whoa, yeah, now I'm getting some excursion noise. Alright, let's bring it down again. Yeah, farted out, but when did it fart out? Some furniture rattles on the other side of the room at 43 hertz. 37 up. 38. There's 30. And this is where it dies, in the high 20s, whereas the Klipsch box kept going a little further. And so the bass basically felt different. Keep it going. So the bass basically felt a little different when you listen to songs like Urbania. The joke got old last time we did this. So yeah, the bass waves Urbania song felt different with the Klipsch box because it was more still woofer and bass and less fart noise and port noise. So yeah, and I believe there's some other YouTubers out there who can vouch for this. The box does play a role, and the design of the box and the materials of the box does play a role in what sounds like what at what frequencies. Just for fun though, let's get that subwoofer on the desk and check out that airflow. Well, since we have it here, let's see this beast in action. .49 hertz. So you can still hear something resembling bass. There's also some stuff around there. But once we cross 30 hertz, that's the end of the game. Here we are at 25 hertz, and the cone is definitely still doing stuff. And there's still stuff coming out of the port. But now we've run into the laws of physics. The way the box is designed and the way the port is designed, even though the Klipsch speaker was originally made for something that goes all the way down to 25 hertz, it's not going to sound the same because of the acoustics of the box. This is the interesting part here, because what this tells me is that for all these Klipsch boxes I have, like the one with the dual 6.5s that foam rotted out, I could probably get some cheap 6.5ers and get some similar performance, assuming the woofer can, actually do some excursion at those frequencies and power levels. So it's interesting. There are some videos on YouTube from other YouTubers that can verify this, that sometimes, the box makes all the difference as to what it does. Like, for example, the dual 6.5s, this is nice and comfy feeling with the port air that's coming out at 30 hertz, but on the dual 6.5s, this would be just tooting all over the place. On the Klipsch fart machine with the dual 6.5s, which I foam rotted one of the cones on. So I could theoretically put two 6.5s in there, bring it back into service, and have it sound pretty good. Or maybe I should just rewire that one to be a passive sub as well. So there is bass down to about 30 hertz or so, but when you listen to a song that's designed to go lower, like Bass Waves' Urbania down at 25 hertz, which is what we're at right now, then you will hear the difference. Alright, that's enough playing with this thing. So the big thing to do is to fix the other box. One thing that is worth noting, though, is that subwoofers have their place even if you have large speakers that can handle frequencies going all the way down to 60 or 40 hertz. Again, because of the shape of the box. So I do have 5 1/4 woofers in all my so-called satellites nowadays, because the satellite speakers are all bookshelves, except for this one, which has 4-inch woofers. But the frequency responses on these goes all the way down to about 60 hertz, if not 40 hertz. But 40 hertz and 60 hertz through a regular speaker isn't going to sound like 40 hertz and 60 hertz through a sub, because again, the design of the box. The driver can play it, but the laws of physics are what you're going to crash into by not having the right kind of box to play things through. So the sub is made, of course, for non-directional frequencies with this downward firing ported enclosure here. So I've got everything set to 80 hertz, double bass is on, which means that even though there's some bass going to the 5 1/4 woofers, it's also being copied over to the sub itself, so that way the sub can make up for whatever these things don't do. Theoretically, what I should do is set everything to small, so that way the crossover is more of a hard cut, and that way the frequencies don't go at all to those woofers. The woofers are more for mid-bass, and this thing does everything. But I actually found that blending the bass together between the sub and the bookshelves actually has worked out better than I thought it would, because we're talking about an 8 versus 5 1/4. So, my mouse underneath all of this, though, let me just try to illustrate. It'll depend on your speakers, of course, whether or not this works. We're going to set this to subwoofer no. Now this is over there we go. Set it to subwoofer no. Now, this is a horrible place to put a sub, right on the desk. Hint, hint, for those of you with so-called computer speakers and your subwoofer is on the desk alongside your sats, put it on the floor or somewhere so it can actually have something to rattle. But even with this in a terrible position, let's compare the You're No Help song from Silent Partner and hear the difference in the sound. This is yacht rock type stuff here, so it's got a mixture of all frequencies and sounds very, very 70s. Well, it would help if I reinitialized the HDMI sound. Let's see here. Oh, wait a minute. No, it's not going to play because I'm in the menu. Sheesh, how long have I had this thing? So this is with no subwoofer.
Epic fail.
Nothing. And it sounds like, a cheap boombox with 2 speakers. However, let's go in here and let's turn on the sub. You can feel it going a little lower. Definitely feel something going on there. Yep. Now that doesn't have a lot of punch down around 30 hertz, but even though it doesn't have a lot of punch, the higher bass to mid bass going through here really rounds out the lower end of the sound spectrum versus those things on their own. So this gets a little deeper and richer, whereas those do more pop, pop, pop type stuff because of the shape of the enclosures. So that's why subs are a thing. And in this case, the shape of the box is what really helps with things and what exactly things sound like when all of the frequencies are properly represented. Home sweet cabinet for the tougher feeling Onkyo sub. It's nice to have a backup subwoofer anyway, so if anything happens to the main one, we just toss this one in. And in the meantime, it can be a nice little stand for a plant or something. Hey, what can I say? It's an upgrade path, just like with computers. You start out with something, like for example a simple box with one of these, and then you move up as you learn more about the equipment and the physics behind it and the science behind what makes sound good at various frequencies and things like that. Although, unfortunately, I've looked at Onkyo's catalog nowadays, and a lot of their entry-level stuff doesn't have as simple of a design as this. I've seen stuff that's more along the lines of like a Bose bass module or something like that, where they try to hide the fact that they're cheesing things with smaller drivers instead of just having, boom, 8 inches, box, port, you're done. So now we just got to figure out what we're going to do about the klipsch. Do we want to change up the wiring? Do we want to take this RCA cable right here and just snap off one of the things? I never use RCAs for anything anymore. Basically, we had problems with conductivity last time and resistance, so how can we get around that to get some decent bass that goes down a little below 30 hertz again? Before we go putting that driver back in, though, we don't really get much of a chance to see things from this perspective. So there's our negative positive, all done up with solderless lugs. The interesting thing here is the negative for this is not going out to the amplifier, it's actually going across the zip ties to the other speaker. So yes, whatever is in here is wired in series. So if I really wanted to drop the impedance down into 8 ohms or something, I should get 4 ohm woofers to replace these two. So, but they're still good. So maybe if these foam rot or something like their 6.5 cousins did earlier, And we can take a look at the inside of this too. We've got, the port is artfully hidden underneath this piece of board right here. So instead of it just being like a paper towel plus tube or something like that, it's actually part of the wood, part of the design. A little bit of bracing too. This thing has always been a lot more solid, and it seems like everything in here is a lot thicker than on the Onkyo box anyway. So, but this was part of a computer speaker system that used to cost $50,000 back in its day. I think I might have even paid full price for it, and I said, you know what, I'm just going to deposit the tax return when I get it back the next year. So, of course, I was a Klipsch Pro Media fan from college, but this is before those two worlds collided. Nowadays, you don't need high-end computer speakers anymore, and even Logitech is backing out of some of that. I was looking at their catalog earlier, and it seems like they're just making a Bluetooth appliance, as it were. Nothing like the old days of the Klipsch killers or anything, because folks are figuring out that now that the two worlds have come together, if you want good computer sound, you might as well just get good all-around sound and find a way to hook your computer into that system, instead of being like, haha, awesome computer speakers. Oh, that's a nice design choice. I see some metal in there. Ah, so can't focus it very well, but the wood eventually turns to metal on the other side, and that's what helps keep the drivers in place. So, gotta figure out what to do with these, or go driver shopping, or something. But this is the better sounding box, so let's put it back together. There we go, soldered up our next hack job subwoofer cable with one of the RCAs that I never really have much use for anymore. So all that RCA, and then it becomes speaker wire at the very end to go into the receiver with. Already checked what has continuity, what doesn't have continuity, everything checks out. So we have ourselves our new subwoofer cable. One thing that's interesting, though, when you fiddle around with subwoofers for a long period of time, and the open subwoofer cabinet makes your place smell like Subwoofer. I guess it comes with the turf with this kind of stuff. Okay, a little bit of fun time with this thing. Before we go putting it back in its usual spot, the cable's up and running, and I actually forgot that I used to turn up the subwoofer when I was playing bass songs, so I was a little biased earlier. But let's start at 220 hertz. Something's already rattling. Okay, we're at 66 hertz right now. Let's listen to stuff start rattling. I think the desk rattles between 90 and 60 hertz. Down we go. Into the 40s. This is awesome. There's a ton of air coming out. But notice how, thanks to the different shape of the port, it's not making any fart noises. If something blocks it or gets sucked into it, it'll be a completely different story. But that's 43 hertz. Let's continue. 38. And this is the fun part, because we're getting down this low and it's not turning into port noise. It's staying as nice, clean bass. 35, 4, 3, 2, 1, 30. This is where we lose the other one. Something's shaking. Keep going. 29, 28. Now it's starting to drop off, and of course its minimum frequency is 25. But I still hear something, and this thing is still vibrating, but it's nowhere near as loud. So, but that's the thing. That's why I've kept using this thing. Here we are, 29 hertz, and it's still nice, clean bass. There's some stuff coming out of the port. But that's the fun part, is that when it bottoms out, it quietly bottoms out, and this nice wide port keeps the air from being too much of an issue. And now we're down to 16 hertz, and it's just moving some air. Now we're hitting the laws of physics in the teens instead of the 20s. Yeah. Ooh, something really rattles at 44. Maybe it's the desk, or it's the cabinet thing I have on the side. It changes sides when we go down to 42. I love doing this stuff. Alright, give the amp a rest here. But there you go. So, yeah, Someone joked way back when about 101 uses for a broken sub, but that's what I'm looking for, and that's why I'm using this Klipsch as a passive with the SWS link, is because I'm looking for neutral bass. I'm not looking for a truck system that caves your chest in every time you crank it up, nor am I looking to break any windows or anything like that. But what I'm looking for is for the low end of whatever I'm listening to be properly and represented, even if it means turning a few things up here and there if I want things to be boomier. So, although right now I do have the crossover at 200 hertz, so it would be boomier than normal, I'll put it back down to 80. So, one important detail that I'm remember from before I clean my desk out, put this in the back and face it so that the port is firing air against the wall. I think that's how I got it to go a little deeper last time. Plus, it'd be good for scaring any mice in the walls. Note to self, this thing spits the most air at 40 hertz. Oh, that feels nice. That'd be a nice fan in the summertime. So, run 40 hertz through it in order to get the dust out. Got it. One last silent partner You're No Help test for the road. Should be much easier to do with an RCA. Oh yeah, the low end completely goes away when this thing's not helping out. A little bit intermittent though. Oh yeah, you can feel the difference. Even with the crossover set back to 80 hertz and double bass turned on, I'm sending full range to the 5 1/4 woofers and just not the same, man. Welcome home, big bass block. About time this thing got back into the swing of things, I should say. Alright, that's enough silent partner for now. So, yes, up to 130 watts on the channel, and just turn the sub up if I want more bass. I could have a better crossover, though. I would like to see this thing cut off the minute things got directional a little bit better. But that's something we'll have to play with in the amp a little bit more. So, another subwoofer adventure is in the books! Till next time, this is MultimediaJay signing off. Thanks for stopping by.